Have you ever read a book that you loved so much that a year later you're still thinking about it? That's what this whole entire video is about. Today, ladies and gents, we are going to be talking about my favorite books of 2020. Really quick addendum at the beginning of this video. There are a lot of amazing books I read this year, and a lot of them could not make it on this list. A lot of books that should have and could have deserved honorable mentions, but unfortunately I can't be talking about all of them, and unfortunately it is December 12th right now. I need to be pre-filming, so I could in fact read one of my favorite books of the year before the end of the year, but if that's the case, I guess maybe I'll just insert something right here that's like, oh my god! Did I insert something? This year I had a weird thing happen to me, and that is called, I found a new genre that I really like. And that new genre is weird horror. Weird YA contemporary horror. Not all of them are YA, but I'm digging it for some reason. So I've kind of divided my favorites into two categories. And since I only got into this weird horror in October, I only have 4 books on the list of my favorites for it. So I have kind of weird horror and then fantasy. So we're going to be getting through all of these really, really dang quickly. Let's start out. The first one that I would like to give an honorable mention to that I don't know if it quite makes the list is The Shadows by Alex North. So this is a story following I read The Whisper Man and The Shadows by him, and I personally like The Shadows better. Looking on Goodreads, it appears that most people prefer The Whisper Man better, which was really good and excellent in its own sense, but I just got into The Shadows more because it was creepier to me. So we're following this young boy who, it's been a while since I've read it, so this might take me a while. So the Goodreads summary describes it as, you knew a teenager like Charlie Crabtree, a dark imagination, a sinister smile, always on the outside of the group. Some part of you suspects he might be capable of doing something awful. 25 years ago, Crabtree did just that, committing a murder so shocking that it attracted the strange kind of infamy that only exists on the darkest corners of the internet, and inspired more than one copycat. Paul Abrams remembers the case too well. Crabtree and his victim were Paul's friends. So we are following 2 different timelines, both told by Paul, and then there's also a cop reporter who we are following who is telling us another part. I think her name's Amanda, because my name's Amanda, and I think I remember that. So when Paul is a child, he is really good friends with this boy named Charlie, and they have a group of 4 friends who they do this weird thing where they lucid dream and they can enter into each other's dreams, and they basically decide to give justice to people who have been wronged, and in Charlie's mind that means murder. And then the case goes unsolved for years because Charlie disappears one day in the middle of the woods, and people believe that there's this magical reason that he basically sacrificed people in a certain way and then could disappear. And like I said, he's like a teenager in the book. Then we're following Paul as an adult. He has to come back home, and he's starting to deal with re-entering these life where he had to deal with Charlie as a child and surviving having a friend like that. And it was really good to me because for whatever reason, I just really dig children horror stories, like horror stories with kids as front and center. And I love lucid dreaming. I think it's really cool. And I loved the weird twists and turns that went along with it. I will say that the reason why this one only gets an honorable mention is because I didn't like the ending. I felt like it was bad. So I ended up rating it really well on Goodreads, but there are a few books like that where I'm just like, I really loved this book, but the ending was bad. I should mention right here that none of these books are in any particular order. I couldn't bring myself to put them into an order because I love all of them. So I'm just going in the random order of how I wrote them down. Lakewood by Megan Giddings, and I really enjoyed this one a lot. I talk about it on my channel every once in a while and my nose itches so much. So we're following a young Black girl. Her grandmother dies and she has to deal with taking over the family finances. It's just her and her mom left. She agrees, signs up for being an experiment in this memory test facility. Now, I know a lot of people who didn't absolutely love this book, so I guess I probably shouldn't put it on my favorites list, but who cares what other people think? I really enjoyed it. I felt like it was super slow, super kind of just atmospheric, you're in the moment. I feel like I can really enjoy a slow book if it's told the right way and if it's horrifying. And this one definitely was horrifying. We get to see the awful treatment of people of color, specifically this Black woman, how she is being treated as not a human in these experiments, and how her rights are taken from her, and how awful of a situation she will get herself into just for money because she can't survive without it, and no place else basically will hire her. I really enjoyed that one. My biggest issue with it was the ending. Wow, I wonder if this is going to be a theme for horror. The next book I want to talk about, and I guess I could talk about these, no, let's not talk about them together, is I Crawl Through It by A.S. King. Are we shocked? Are we shocked? I talk about this book a lot. So I tabbed this one, which is also a common theme in the books that are going to be on this list. I freaking loved it. I felt like it was the right kind of weird. So this is a YA. I don't even know if you'd call it a horror. It's just a weird contemporary book, magical realism. It's weird, and that's what I'm liking about it. So we're following these 4 characters who are all dealing with the mundanity of life. Is that a word? I don't know. And they go to this high school where these bomb threats are called in every single day, and they have to do these like evacuations every single day, and they're trying to pass standardized tests, and they all are just failing to deal with the world and the boxes that the world is putting them into. And it's super weird. There's this whole entire like subplot where these 2 characters ride in an invisible helicopter to the arrival place where they meet this like magical cultish society. There's this girl who is inside out because she has eaten herself. There's this girl that every single time she lies, her hair grows. It has great character development. It has really weird themes. It just has beautiful, beautiful writing in it. And one of my absolute favorite pieces that I often talk about is that at the beginning of every single chapter, and oftentimes at the random parts throughout, you'll see this little standardized test bubbles. And what those are is at the very beginning, the main character tells you that she was taking this test, and every single time she didn't know what the answer was, she would just fill in A, B, C, D, E, F, whatever, based on her mood. And if you relate those back to her mood from there, it matches up. And I think that's cool. There we go. That's the next one. The next book that will be on this list, and I don't think we are shocked by it, is You Must Not Miss by Katrina Leno. I freaking loved this book so much. I also tabbed it. This is a YA weird contemporary magical realism about this girl named Magpie who is dealing with the world. Her dad cheated on her mom, and she walked in on him doing it with her aunt, and her dad then left, and her mom went back into alcoholism, and her sister abandoned her, and so she's basically raising herself, trying to pass high school, and can't really motivate herself to do anything. So she writes in this notebook about this world called Near, where she wants to escape, and one day she escapes into it, and she starts to take things from our world into Near, and from Near into here. And it was super weird. It was super funky. The ending is super open, and I don't think it would make a lot of people happy, but I loved it, and I talk about it a lot. Maybe not on my channel so much, but in real life I'm like, hey, have you read You Must Not Miss by Katrina Leno? Because you should. It's really good. I don't know why I just used that accent, but I did. I also love this cover, and I think it's really pretty, and you should follow this illustrator. So now let's get into the more fantasy. I guess I should call it SFF, because not all of them are fantasy. There are actually, weirdly enough, a few sci-fi on this list. That's weird for me. I'm calling it the fantasy section. So let's get into the fantasy section now. The very first one is actually going to be just a series that I absolutely loved, and I read book 1 and 2 this year. So that, in case you're shocked, is going to be Gideon the Ninth and Harrow the Ninth by Tasmin Muir. I freaking love these books. Oh my god, they're so good and so complicated and so diverse and just absolutely gorgeous. Like, look at these 2 books. They're so good. So I read Gideon the Ninth earlier this year, and then I reread Gideon the Ninth when Harrow the Ninth came out this year. I think Harrow the Ninth is one of the few books on this list that actually came out in 2020, because I don't read books the year they come out, apparently. So Gideon the Ninth, we're following this woman as she's like this prisoner on this planet, the ninth, whatever, and she makes a deal with the princess of this planet that if she goes and protects her in this competition that she's going to have to be in, that she will get her whole freedom. So Gideon goes off with her, and Haro Jesuit, the whatever, I always forget her name, and her get into a lot of mischief because they hate each other. So Haro the Ninth picks up right where Gideon the Ninth left off, and my God, it is so good. It is so good, and I won't tell you anything about it because if I tell you anything about this book, it'll spoil book one, but it was so freaking fantastic. I actually tabbed one thing. Book two was so weird and so good, and there were so many moments where I was like, what's going on? And then I'd understand, and then I'd be confused again, and then it was fantastic. I highly recommend you checking out both of these books. I cannot wait for the next one, which will not be coming out until 2022, I don't think. So I'm gonna go cry in a corner until that time. The next book I want to talk about is going to be Middle Game by Seanan McGuire. I tabbed this. So this is also it's like a contemporary sci-fi. We're following this set of twins. They are a science experiment, basically, by this alchemist, and he thinks that if he does this certain thing with them, that he can get to the improbable road, which is a destination that he wants to get to that I'm not still totally sure what it is, to be honest. He has this whole entire plan where he separates the twins, and they are called Roger and Dodger, and Roger is the boy and Dodger is the girl. Please say that I'm correct in that. So Roger's really good with language, and Dodger's really good at math and numbers and calculating things, and they have this ability to talk to each other in their heads, even though they've been separated and they are like across a country from each other. And it was really good, and I want to tell you a ton more about it, but I won't. But I will say that we delve into time travel in this book. So if you're a fan of that, check it out. It's super confusing and super weird, just kind of like Gideon and Haro the Ninth. This one, don't read if you have a headache because you're going to have to concentrate on it. Another book that I really loved this year was The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. I knew her name. I don't know why I stopped and looked at it. So, hey, look, another book I tabbed, but I tabbed this one in a really weird manner, which is why they're all at the top. Weirdly enough, I don't know the order of my videos off the top of my hand, but in my DNF video for the year, you're going to see the sequel to this one, and I apologize for that. Freaking loved this one. I think it was so good. So we're following this girl named Rin, and she's poor, orphaned, from this group of people, this culture that has been killed off, and she goes to this military academy where she learns to be the best. And so she comes into some abilities, some powers that she wasn't sure she had. No one knew she was going to have. And she makes some friends, she makes some enemies, she fights some bad guys. What's really cool about this book is there is this whole entire realization that Rin goes through where all people are people no matter which side of the war they're on. It's really dark. It's really grim. I don't think you're supposed to necessarily like Rin, but I also was rooting for her the entire time. I felt like the writing was really good. I felt like there's a lot of stuff in this. It's a very adult fantasy, in this adult fantasy that lots of people would love, and I think it is something that is accessible to a lot of people, and I highly recommend it. There were scenes where I was aghast, and I read this twice this year, and both times I had the same emotional reactions that I had. It was so good. I definitely will keep this on my shelf and reread it in the future, but I do think that it could have been a standalone. I think you could have written another 100, 500 words in it and wrapped it up here instead of continuing on with the series. But that's my own personal opinion, and it doesn't matter what I think because it has a series. The next book on my list is The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. Hey, look, another one that I reread this year. So I read it once and then I reread it again this year, and I tabbed, but for whatever reason I only tabbed the first half of the book. I mean, we're not judging here, are we? So The Starless Sea is about this boy named Zachary, and he one day in a library finds a book, and it seems to be about his life, and so he starts to investigate it. And the thing that really did it for me was in this book there are all of these short stories throughout that are metaphors for the main novel and talk about the past and the future of this secret society that Zachary becomes a part of and starts to investigate. And there's all this beautiful lyrical writing and all of these metaphors, and nothing is as it seems, and it's really, I feel like it's kind of a slower paced book where you're not supposed to necessarily be here for the plot. It's not so much a plot book as it is just about the writing. So that's not for everyone, but I absolutely loved it. The next one is The Raven Tower. I don't own a physical copy of this, but I listened to the audiobook, and my God, I never thought that a book was going to stay with me as long as this one did, especially for just a fantasy book. In this book, we are following this main guy. I don't remember his name, but what's really cool is he's a trans man. Like, when is the last time you read a fantasy book where the main character was transgender and it wasn't an issue, but it was still a part of them and talked about and addressed and positively reflected on? Candle just made a weird noise. He is the second in command to this one ruler. He's like the prince in line to be the ruler, and they are called back to the Raven Tower where this god is supposed to live, and the ruler of the realm is supposed to stay in this tower. And the main prince's father, the ruler, died, so he has to get back in a certain amount of days to take over the ruling. And when they get there, it happens very shortly in the book, so I'll let you know, his uncle has decided that he is now the ruler, and they are dealing with the repercussions of what if the god doesn't accept his uncle. Shouldn't the prince be in line to get the throne? Shouldn't he kick him out? What should be going on? There's a lot of political intrigue, but what's really unique about this book and the reason why I loved it is it's all told in second person perspective from the god at the bottom of the tower as he's watching it unfold. And he's telling the story to the main boy as he is at the end of the story. How do I describe this? He's telling the whole entire story to the main boy from the end. So when the ending gets there and they meet up with each other, it was just like this. And some crazy stuff happened at the end of the book, and my mind was blown. It is a slower book because there are these sections throughout where we go back in time and look at like the creation of the world or how this god got to be where he is at. And I don't think I'd recommend this book to tons of people, but I loved it and I felt like it was so good and so fresh and so unique. And the only reason why I don't own a copy of it is because I want a hardback, and they're hard to find. I don't know if you know this, but they're really hard to find. I love The Raven Tower, and I'm probably going to reread it in 2021 because it was so freaking good. Gotta get some water because I've been talking for 20 minutes. The next two books that I'm going to be talking about, I also own the audio, not the physical, so that's why they're here. And so the first one of that is going to be Forest of Souls, which is a YA fantasy with no romance. I truly believe the main character is asexual, but that's a different story. So we are following this girl. What is her name? I don't remember her name. Oh well. And her best friend dies really quickly in the story, and she miraculously brings her back to life. And because of her use of magic and kind of, oh my God, what's going on? I just brought my best friend back to life. She has to go and talk with this Spider King that lives in the middle of the Forest of Souls. And it was so good. The author is of Asian descent, and the main character is of Asian descent. I cannot remember where the story is based off of. And it was so fantastic. I loved reading it. Every single moment of it was great. I actually read it in one day. That's how hooked I was into the story. The sequel's coming out in 2021, and I can't wait to get to it. I don't really have much to say other than just go check this one out. It was a really good, fresh fantasy. It was super creepy. If you don't like spiders, don't read it because it was creepy and eerie, and it definitely felt kind of like where horror and fantasy meet each other, but I loved it. And then the next one is going to be The Wolf of Arwen Yarrow. Ooh, who is this written by? I can't remember, but it'll be here. I loved this one. So this series is called The Chronicles of the Bitch Queen, which like already tells you something about it, right? That it's gonna be good. So we're following this woman who's a mom. I've been talking all year about how I love mom fantasies, like fantasies that follow a mom. And then I had to put one on this list, right? Because it was so freaking good. And it's a lot of political intrigue. She's trying to bring peace to her nation because it's divided, and lots of things happen. I don't know how much I want to tell you about it. It's a hard one to talk about because this story changes so much so quickly and so much happens in the book. But know that she has to deal with her husband, and the people not knowing which one of them should be the leader, and we're dealing with this beautiful, beautiful culture, world building. I believe the author is Filipina, and that the story takes place in a land inspired by that culture, and it is so good. Just go check it out and look at this cover. Like, isn't it gorgeous? I want it. I want a copy of it so bad. I'm just stalling to buy it, honestly. And then the next one I'm going to be talking about, and I want to show you my tabbed copy because the tabs are really pretty, but it's being used to hold up my tripod. So instead you're going to see my untabbed copy of Legacy of Ash. I did a whole entire video on this. I went into great depths of why I loved this book, why it was my favorite book ever. I reread it this year, realized it probably wasn't my favorite book ever, but I love it so freaking much. It was so good. I have the sequel. I'm not reading the sequel because I'm afraid it's not going to hold up, but it was so good and I highly recommend this book. I'm not going to go in depth about it here because that video really does it justice and I can't do this book justice in like 2 minutes. And then the final book we're going to be talking about on this list, yes, there's only one more, is Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse. This is probably my least favorite on this list, but it was so good that I had to put it on here. Really, really appreciate what this book did, not only for me as a reader, but for every other person who could have the honor of reading this book, and for fantasy in general, because not only is Rebecca Roanhorse an Indigenous author, but she wrote a culture that was pre-Columbian and thriving and beautiful and doing so great. And I loved it. I think that we should have more diverse fantasy because we need more diverse fantasy, and we should shout out the ones that are successful, right? So this book, we're following lots of different POVs. There's this girl who is a woman. There's this woman who is a captain. She's kind of like a pirate, and she has this task to take this package across the sea in like a ridiculously short amount of time. We find out that the package is a human male, and we also follow his POV because he has these crazy magical abilities and he seems to be some kind of like god person. And then we're also following this sky priestess. I always forget if she's the sky or like the sun or what priestess, and she's abandoned her whole entire family to get exactly what she wants in life, and now she is starting to notice that people are going missing and people are being abandoned in this sky temple, and she is starting to notice that things might not be as they seem, and she's starting to wonder if maybe she shouldn't have cut all of her ties with her entire past life to do this thing. So this is the first in a series of, I don't know how many books are going to be in this series, but I think you should check out Rebecca Roanhorse. She does this series, and she has Trail of Lightning, which is also a really good series that you should try. And I read both of those this year too. Those are going to be 4. I'm rambling. This is a good book. Check it out. And this cover is gorgeous. So yeah, that's it. That's all of the books that I think deserve to be mentioned as my favorites of 2020. I'm not putting a number on it like my top 10 or my top 15. I just grabbed the books that I most liked this year. And like I said, there are plenty of honorable mentions. Ninth House would probably be up there. Kebab would probably be up there as an honorable mention too, honestly. Kingdom of the Wicked might be up there as an honorable mention. But we'd be going on forever if I did all of my honorable mentions. So if you want to know all of the books I read this year and what I rated them, you can watch my wrap-ups that are all handy dandy in a playlist on my channel, or you can go on my Goodreads, which is linked down below, and scroll through all the books that I've ever read and see what I really enjoy. Thank you for watching. Oh, I forgot to say. So another thing I want to say about this list of books is that I didn't include any books that were rereads from a previous year. So if I read them at all a previous year and then reread them this year, they're not going on this list because I obviously love them and obviously they're favorites of mine. So only books I read this year are on this list. So thank you all for watching. I appreciate each and every one of you, and I don't remember how my outro goes, but until next time, I will talk to you in the comments. Bye!